So I'm going to introduce our panelists. I've known each of them in different capacities, and you guys are in for such a treat today with them. I will confess that it's ostensibly about Gen AI, but I'm going to broaden the Q&A just because we have so much knowledge on this panel. So I'm going to go in alphabetical order and introduce all three of them, and then some questions, and then we'll leave about 15 minutes for audience questions. So I'm going to start with Perri Adams. Perri is a special assistant to the director at DARPA, where she advises stakeholders at the agency and across the government on the next generation of AI and cybersecurity. Prior to this, she was a program manager within DARPA's I2O, where, among other programs, she created the truly phenomenal AI Cyber Challenge. Previously, she was a technical advisor for R&D at DARPA, and before joining DARPA, she supported various U.S. government customers, including other parts of the DoD, while at Boeing and 26 Technologies. She is also one of the organizers of the DEF CON Capture the Flag, which is the premier hacking competition. Next, we have Dr. Hyrum Anderson. He is a CTO at Robust Intelligence, which was recently acquired by Cisco, and I'm learning Friday he will officially be a Cisco employee, so congratulations. Previously, Hyrum led the Microsoft's AI Red Team and chaired its governing board. He served as the principal researcher in national labs and cybersecurity firms, including chief scientist at Endgame. He's a co-founder of CAMLIS, Conference on Applied Machine Learning, which is just in a few weeks. And he has co-authored a book called, which is awesome, by the way, called Not With a Bug, But With a Sticker. Finally, we have Joe Lucas. Joe is a senior offensive security researcher focused on AI at NVIDIA. He's the founder and chair of the NUM-Focus Security Committee and is a member of the Jupyter Security Council. He was one of the architects and hosts of the DEF CON AI Village Capture the Flag competition and passionate about machine learning cybersecurity education. He served in the Army at U.S. Cyber Command and the 101st Airborne Division. So I told the panelists I'm not going to start with any softball questions. We're going to get to the hard stuff. I'm going to start with Hyrum. So Hyrum, you've worked in this field of adversarial AI for many years. It's an emerging field for this community. You contributed recently to the NIST adversarial machine learning taxonomy and terminology of attacks and mitigations. How much of what you see in this taxonomy are attacks that would actually be seen kind of in the wild, kind of AI attacks versus white hat researchers? So maybe talk a little bit about, are there some adversarial attacks that you're seeing more often? Because we maybe wouldn't know what to look for in this community.
First, it's an honor to be here. Thank you, Anita. And I just want to echo that, of all the important things we're talking about today, it's people in Florida that are foremost in our minds. But I did have the opportunity to participate with a great collaborators on this NIST taxonomy. For those unfamiliar, it actually encompasses not just the buzz since 2021, but it incorporates the adversarial machine learning research that's been happening since the early 2000s. So it's a long history of mostly academic research in subverting machine learning systems, making them do things. And it's framed in a way that's familiar, perhaps, to many folks in cybersecurity. It talks about slightly different words, but confidentiality and integrity and availability, and with generative AI, also a misuse category. What I'll say about that is that most, like maybe 95%, I'm making this number up, are things that have been done by white hat hackers and published academically. But the name of the game today in securing AI, in my view, the name of the game today is about vulnerability discovery. And I'm using the word vulnerability, I'm abusing that term, maybe we'd call it weakness discovery in AI systems. Understanding what can be done to them, even when we don't see them in the wild. Now, there have been things done in the wild, and maybe I can give two examples. Before generative AI, one of I think the most clever things that I've seen an attacker do recently is using image manipulations. So for those unaware, you can subtly alter an image such that an image classifier will misrecognize it as something totally different. And the famous example from literature is there's a picture of a bus, but the model says it's an ostrich, or there's a panda, but the model says it's a gibbon, if you've seen those. Well, a similar technique was used by phishers for website phishing, and colleagues, and I gave a talk at RSA a couple of years ago, how we discovered that people would manipulate certain settings on the web page, knowing that the defense was an object detection network that would misidentify certain key features in the machine learning model. For example, looking for the word password or login, or looking for a specific, like the Microsoft logo. And the ODN, the object detection network, would miss those because of manipulations to those images. Super clever in the wild, right? In the wild. Now that's one out of, I don't know, thousands of techniques that you know, for every one we discover, there's 999 that have not been used in the wild. Obviously, with generative AI, the barrier has dramatically lowered on the sophistication. For the image attack I described, you kind of need to know math to circumvent ChatGPT. You need to like just try a few things, right? And it's not that hard. And so the things that we're seeing in the wild today across our customer base, that includes highly regulated industries, it includes government, are much more pervasive of the things we see in the wild, but they're not sophisticated. The one message I just want to bring home is low sophistication does not mean low impact. And that has never been more true today than in generative AI exploitation of those weaknesses. So I will stop at that, Anita.
So Joe, I'm going to move on to you. You've worked in AI security and specifically in AI red teaming for a while. So maybe tell us a little bit about what you do at NVIDIA as an AI red teamer. And then I want to ask you talk about agentic AI a little bit and what that is and whether you think it's a good or a bad thing.
Sure. Thanks, Anita. AI red teaming comes from the field of red teaming in conventional security, which comes from the tradition of red versus blue. So the blue team would be the people building and running an application or system, and the red team would be friendly people, but trying to think like an adversary. Sometimes that's emulating a real adversary emulation. Sometimes it's kind of just thinking like an adversary and trying to invoke some specific action. In offensive security, red teaming is also differentiated from penetration testing. Normally, penetration testing is trying to provide some measure of coverage from an external surface, whereas a red team is trying to achieve a specific objective. So when we built the AI red team at NVIDIA, what we have scoped our work towards is the entire machine learning operations process. And so we often will do assumed breach style operations. So let's say we already have access to some sort of critical system. Can we impact the final deployed AI system through adversarial manipulation? And so that may be manipulation of a data set, it may be manipulation of a CI/CD pipeline, or it may be manipulation of input into the final system to try and get some sort of output. In traditional cybersecurity, we talk about the CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And so generally, that's how my team scopes our objectives. Can we impact the confidentiality of this system or data, the integrity of its output, or the availability of the system? You will also see AI red teaming used many other places to talk about harms and abuse. So is the system, can it be generate output that's harmful to a specific population, or can it be abused in a way that the maintainers don't intend? And so we have a team at NVIDIA that does that as well. Your next question was about agentic systems. So when, there's this kind of broad category of AI where people generally think about one model that's deployed, it receives a specifically shaped input and produces a specifically shaped output. When we talk about agentic systems, it's building these into more composable systems like you would think of with traditional microservices, where you might have some sort of planning architecture, you might call some sort of tool, and you do this to increase the autonomy of the system, its ability to execute some sort of control flow loop. And the third part of the question.
Good or bad?
Yeah, I think that that's the part I was looking forward to. So good or bad for security in general? Like what is the impact of these agentic systems, which are really just starting to rise in popularity and maturity? And I think in terms of when people think of traditional security operations, they're going to be a phenomenal boon because we have a real resource shortage in terms of defenders. You can only have so many people answering input tickets, responding to paging notices. And what the agentic systems do is reduce the initiative asymmetry. So attackers get to decide when they're going to attack and what they're going to attack. And if you only have one person working incident response, they might be at the soccer game, and it's going to take them 30 minutes to get back, another 10 minutes to log in. And as these operations get faster and faster, the damage may already have been done. Whereas an agentic system can help start to mitigate those risks earlier. That being said, agentic systems are going to introduce their own kind of attack surfaces and risk to manipulation, just as Hyrum has kind of alluded to. And so as you think about introducing these sorts of products and services into your environment, you have to be able to assess their capabilities and limitations and get a kind of an idea of what the failure modes are before you kind of grant something, some sort of service role autonomy into your network.
So along the lines of that agentic AI, Perri, can you talk a little bit about the program you created at DARPA, AI for Cyber, kind of the rationale behind it? I mean, you talk about DARPA doing high risk, high reward. That's a great definition, I think, of your program. Kind of where you see it going and what you think is kind of maybe the ideal outcome of this AI for Cyber.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. And I'll echo Hyrum that our thoughts are with the people of the Carolinas and Florida right now. So and speaking about public infrastructure and the importance of having electric grids and water treatment plants and all of the infrastructure that makes our lives feasible and safe and easy. That was the original impetus for the challenge. When you're at DARPA, you work across the U.S. government with partners that have an array of problems, and many of them are: we need to secure these embedded systems. We need to secure this software that's developed by companies that don't have the funds, don't have the business model to have a state-of-the-art security team in-house. And software security is very, very difficult. But as software becomes more ubiquitous, we're seeing this become a serious national security issue. We're seeing attributed Chinese state actors and other state actors try to hack into U.S. infrastructure and identifying it as a pain point in U.S. daily life that they can target. And I mean, this extends to the financial sector, to the healthcare sector, et cetera. And so the impetus for the challenge was, how can we leverage AI to create software security tools that reduce the amount of expertise and the amount of time it takes to secure software, tools that can be made widely available to everyone, folks developing healthcare software, to people developing the software that's managing oil pipelines, let's say. And so my background was is in program analysis, so automating software security problems like vulnerability discovery, binary analysis. And so I came at this problem. I approached this problem from a perspective where I had spent years asking, how do we use more traditional program analysis techniques to secure software? And the point of the challenge was, how can we use AI and how can we combine AI with these techniques to really push the state of the art forward, to potentially find a leap forward in software security. And to do this, I wanted to ensure that we had top-of-the-line AI talent. So I went out and I got some AI companies like OpenAI, Anthropic, Microsoft, and Google to come on as collaborators for the challenge, to advise on how we're structuring the challenge, how we're leveraging their AI models, and to actually help develop some of the challenges. I also brought on the Linux Foundation with the Open Source Security Foundation, and that was an incredibly important part of the challenge. So the challenge focuses on open source software. DARPA has a history of doing challenges in this space to secure to secure software, famously the Cyber Grand Challenge, which asks teams to develop a system that can both identify vulnerabilities, show a proof of vulnerability, and then fix that vulnerability. So in that same model, AICC, the AI Cyber Challenge, asked competitors to develop a system, a fully autonomous system that could automatically identify vulnerabilities, demonstrate it was a vulnerability through a triggering input, and then produce a fix, a patch for that vulnerability. And And unlike Cyber Grand Challenge, which formed which funded much of the basis for this research, and so in that initial effort, they had synthetic software challenges. I wanted to dial up the difficulty. It's been 10 years. Let's dial up the difficulty and let's focus on real world software. And open source presented a perfect opportunity to do that, because not only does it make up the vast majority of our software infrastructure that we have today, but that gives us access to source code, and thus we can develop tools that can fit within companies' CI/CD pipelines that are designed for source code analysis. Have a challenge that's focused on software companies trying to defend their software. And the other aspect of the challenge that's open source is that I tied prize money to competitors open sourcing their solutions. So to actually move to the finals of the challenge, we just held the semifinals in August at DEF CON, where 7 teams won $2 million each and advanced to the finals. In order to win that $2 million, and in order to win the $4, $3, and $1.5 million prizes for the top 3 teams at the finals, which will be in August of next year, you have to open source the system that you create on the challenge. And this is to ensure that this can have as wide adoption as possible. And so you ask about agentic AI and the thought process behind how much of what we produce is automated. So when creating a challenge, you are balancing between the synthetic and the real. So some part of the challenge is going to have to be gamified to make it so that you can have an experience that can be done in a certain amount of time, that can accurately assess these systems. And so you are creating trade-offs, but at the same time, you want to make it as real world as possible. So the tools that come out of AICC are not necessarily going to be out of the box applicable to software security. They will require a bit of maturation, a bit of tweaking, but because we're doing this on real world software, they will require much less of it than we've traditionally seen from these challenges. But we also designed the challenge very carefully with regard to what we wanted to see automated and where we still want to have a human in the loop. And again, this goes back to the open source component. Looking at the open source community, they have spent 30 years asking how to develop software where anyone in the entire world can suggest a change to that software, that can say, hey, I'd like to make a pull request. I'd like to change this. And they've come up with a process for having humans verify these changes and then introduce them into whatever software library, software project it is. And I wanted to leverage that exact same system. And so that's how the challenge is modeled, that these are patches that are suggested, and actually part of how the patch is structured is to look like commit. And and this is when these tools become real world after the end of the challenge and are made available to the public. That is how I would love to see them. I would love to see them used. That we have AI suggesting changes to code, but ultimately those changes are reviewed by a human.
And I think that resonates a lot with this community, because so much of what we do almost exclusively is open source science. But I want to pivot from open source to vendor stuff, Hyrum. So I'll ask you a little tougher question, which is for some of these AI solutions, many of our universities or labs are kind of buying AI solutions. We don't see vendors publish a lot of statistics on the kind of efficacy of their solutions. So maybe talk a little bit about that. And how do we know that these systems work? Defensive AI systems, one would buy from a vendor. How do we know it works?
So do you mean I'm buying a system to use AI, like compare the performance of a ChatGPT versus a Claude, or are you talking about maybe like the defensive side of that? How does my firewall work against your guardrail?
Yeah.
Okay, great question. And let me come at this maybe from so previous to this industry about defending AI systems. I actually was a board member or a participant on the AMTSO, the Anti-Malware Standards Testing Organization. And so let's just first acknowledge that the whole testing industry is not without its controversy. That the things that are published for EDR solutions, for example, speaking of competitions, there is a little bit of gamification that happens even in those enterprises. Because why? Well, because a vendor's reputation is on the line. They don't actually care how well they do as long as they're better than the next guy. And it's a stack ranking that matters. It's a very leaderboard mentality that lends to all sorts of interesting things. So, I've been a part of that. We want to look good to our customers. Of course, we look good in our own data sets, but we don't know how we look with somebody else's data. So that's EDR. That's the XDR domain. So when it comes to defending AI systems, there are, let's just acknowledge also, this is so early days. The number of vendors you can go and buy a solution from, I think you can count them on one hand, maybe two. And then there's some open source. And there's a couple of things that make the disclosure of those things problematic. First of all, I think every vendor, including ourselves, we're happy to disclose what we do, but these are based on our data sets. What are those data sets? They're data sets that we collect from possibly customers or open data sets like these benchmark data sets that are kind of limited in their scope. Many of our efforts today are in fact trying to help enumerate a taxonomy so that we can have a comprehensive data set by which everybody can compare themselves and we know what's going on. So what do I mean by that? In anti-malware, basically you want to say, did you catch this malicious PE file or did you not? In defending a chatbot, I want to know how it performs for toxicity, how it performs for prompt injection attacks, how it performs against these different styles, and within each category, there's a dozen or 24 different sort of subsets of subtaxonomy. This has yet to be fleshed out. We're working very hard to make this available. Actually, some colleagues and I will be maybe publishing some of this in the near future about both data set and taxonomy that will help people to make a comparison for this. So I think the short answer is it's early days. There will be ways to have coarse comparisons that you can do based on these data sets, but also know that as soon as these are released, gamification will happen. Vendors will train on these data sets and optimize for them so that you'll not be able to see very much difference. So I think there's still value in the fact that the taxonomy will exist. So you can create new, say, malicious prompts in a taxonomy that somebody hasn't created a signature for. And that's a way that you could go yourself and probe what that vendor would be, how its performance would be in a guardrail solution. Did that answer the question, Anita?
Yeah, and so along those lines, so many of our, so I'm going to pivot to Joe to ask you, many of our institutions, universities are using ChatGPT or Copilot or whatever it might be, building internal LLMs. They become very popular in our world. What makes an LLM defensible? I mean, you do some red teaming, you've done some of the AI Village, kind of generative red teaming. What makes an LLM secure and defensible?
I think, like many things, this comes down to really defining requirements and trying to narrowly scope applications to specific use cases. If you want an application that can do everything, it can do everything, right? And so if you can narrowly scope a requirement, then you can start to actually build defensive controls. An example is it's very hard for like alignment tuning to differentiate between malware generation task. Can you write me some code to do something bad versus a really benign code generation task that you might have a student asking to do, right? Those are not really significantly distinguishable, and your false positive and false negative rate there is going to be very, very poor. And so to the extent that you can define requirements and then build security controls around them, I think that that's your best step. And that might involve deploying multiple endpoints or using a product to kind of channel through multiple different guardrails based on the intended input and output behavior, which kind of leads into the discussion that I don't consider defensible or security to really be a property of a model binary. It's a property of a system. And so a lot of the security controls you're going to implement exist outside of the ChatGPT API or the model binary. These are application level controls because you can take a user's input, you know something about that user based on authentication and session management, and then you can do some post filtering on their output. And so really, for most organizations, I think that's where you build up your security controls and defensibility.
As Perri, I'm going to channel what some feedback I've gotten from people, which is, all this focus on adversarial AI and human augmented AI. It's distracting us from real day-to-day stuff that many of us deal with, ransomware and kind of stuff that we have to deal with, network attacks. What do you think is a good balance of really keeping in mind kind of your programs and the future of these kind of defenses versus day-to-day, we just got to get stuff done?
I think the exciting thing about the adversarial AI community is that what I have seen is not that it is breaking off a chunk of the cybersecurity community and bifurcating it, but it's bringing in a whole new set of people into cybersecurity. The exciting thing for me about AI security is you have a set of researchers, a set of folks whose expertise is in AI, who are being introduced to these concepts and ideas of security, sometimes for the first time, sometimes they have a background in both. And for the cybersecurity community that is largely made up of cybersecurity experts, not necessarily AI experts, they get to benefit significantly from this introduction of external expertise as well. So I am cautiously optimistic about the focus on adversarial AI. One thing I will say, which is why I'm very excited about the work that, for instance, Hyrum is doing, is that when we talk about AI safety and adversarial AI, and we think about the security challenges that AI systems have, perhaps we are more inclined to focus on things like poisoning attacks, some of these more sexy, mathematically difficult approaches to manipulating AI, when some of the challenges they have are traditional software security challenges, such as you have a somewhat non-deterministic system. Perhaps it should not be able to talk to anywhere on the internet without any oversight. This is a more traditional software security challenge. Or for instance, one of the questions I've gotten asked quite a bit on the challenge is, oh no, is this going to create an AI that can just spam me with all of these commit messages that I have to sift through? And the point I make is that that's already possible. I could write a bot to spam you with commit messages in about an hour if you wanted me to. The difference is at least the AICC bot might have some good feedback for your code base. And so some of the challenges you see in AI can are benefited by this more traditional cybersecurity expertise. One of the things that I've been very excited about from the AI red teaming point of view, actually, and I talked about this at a keynote I gave at Woot a month ago, is how the white hat hacker community has spent the last several decades normalizing the idea of external security security researchers identifying issues and going through a responsible disclosure process with companies. And so that now that AI companies have emerged, they didn't have to invent this wheel themselves. And they have done a fantastic job of leveraging this existing responsible disclosure infrastructure and culture for their own gain. And it's very helpful because AI systems have, I think, the AI industry has an even greater need for this because, for instance, my mother is not going to be trying to figure out how to do a SQL injection on your website, but she has spent a lot of time trying to mess with ChatGPT, and she has figured out the Reddit pages that say whatever the next way to get around some of their barriers are. She's having a lot of fun with it, and so it has, I think, opened the aperture for many different kinds of security researchers.
So this kind of dovetails with my next question, so I'll just start with you, which is how should, you're kind of starting to talk about this, traditional cyber operations, almost everybody here works in cybersecurity. How should we evolve to think about AI threats? If, as Hyrum said, we're not seeing a ton in the wild. Some maybe we're not sure if they're categorized as AI threats, but how should, I guess starting with you, Perri, how should we evolve our cyber operations to now deal with potential AI threats? And especially in this, research education community where a lot is open source. So potentially we may see different or more attacks.
So when I engage in these discussions, one fear that is often raised is we're going to see the next AI. We're going to see an AI WannaCry. We're going to see an AI NotPetya, a worm that just takes out the internet. And my point is we already saw NotPetya. We already saw WannaCry. We've had worms since the 1980s. That is not a novel capability that we've seen cyber actors deploy. And what I'd like to tease out is how exactly is AI going to be the differentiating factor, right? For WannaCry, it was not difficult for North Korea to create the rest of the code around the capability that they used to move between computers. It was that capability itself, which was a exploit for a very difficult to exploit vulnerability in Windows, right? Are we going to see AI find and write that exploit? That's actually incredibly difficult to do, and not something that we've seen AI be applicable to across the board. I think that we need to be much more realistic about how attackers are going to use AI today and how they're going to use AI in the next few years. And these are less sexy than thinking about something that takes out the global shipping industry. Things like being able to do phishing emails at scale and other kinds of phishing attacks. Things like social engineering attacks, right? Combined with more traditional cybersecurity approaches. Perhaps AI focused on evading certain detections, et cetera. But I'd like to see the conversation grounded in some realism of how we're actually going to see it used.
And Hyrum, you dealt with a lot of malware analysis, and you talked to a lot of companies, different verticals. How are they integrating? Or how would you suggest kind of integrating into regular cyber operations this AI, which may or may not be something unto itself? How are you seeing people do it? What do you recommend?
So I like the word you used to evolve. I mean, we have so much process in place that needs to be reused. At the same time, highlighting what's different so we know how to evolve. And maybe I just want to point out a couple things. The first is to note that that machine learning and AI in the last 2 years have become, as a colleague likes to say, they become load-bearing in our applications. So when they were kind of special projects before, these are load-bearing, especially in agentic systems. So we should acknowledge that security, in some sense, software is changing, so security is changing, needs to evolve with it. And some of the things that make this difficult, that's different from, say, protecting your environment against malware or against application security. These fundamentally are non-smooth systems, meaning that if you give one input and get an output, you could change this input, you get a totally different output, and that's not how we're used to thinking about securing systems. In some cases, they're also stochastic, meaning that the same input will give different inputs multiple times. So that's one novelty about how we protect these systems. I would say a second is that, unlike traditional software security, if there's a patch to be implemented due to a vulnerability, I can't really patch. I can't crack open the machine learning model and tickle the neurons and make it work better. So the notion of shift left in AI security has not been rigorously developed yet. We're still on shift right, and it's okay to be there. We have to shift somewhere. Let's start right, while researchers are figuring out how to do things like machine unlearning and patching through the context windows, et cetera. So there's a bunch there that just we need to wrap our mind around and bring into an existing framework. So much has been done, and there's so much that I think that this community that Perri talked about, the adversarial AI community coming to security, are learning from the cybersecurity community, especially about vulnerability disclosure and management, about application security rather than model-centric security. Those things are going to make a big difference as sort of the cybersecurity community takes the lead and defines how to structure these novel elements of now load-bearing machine learning and security, how to handle those with processes that we already have.
I want to pivot a little bit, since your background is AI red teaming. Can some of the new rapidly evolving kind of Gen AI tools and chatbots, in our world, research education, security resources are very thin. There's not a lot of security people because the focus is on science. Are there some tools or ways that we can use Gen AI to help do some AI red teaming or help look at some of the threats Hyrum's talking about? Or what would you recommend that we do to kind of democratize AI red teaming beyond, expensive experts like yourself?
Sure. I think Hyrum kind of brought up a great point that security is not one thing and AI is not one thing, right? There are many different ways you can use the capabilities that exist today. And so if you are an analyst who wants to change or apply some set of skills that don't exist, right? Like chatbots are a great way to kind of start exploring new data, new skills, and kind of act as a mentor if a mentor doesn't exist for you currently. I'll also say that the set of tools existing to do AI red teaming have really come very far in the last year. So at NVIDIA, we use Garrick, which is a vulnerability scanner, and new rules are shipped into that on a monthly basis. And so that has really lowered the bar for analysts to do some of these probes or attacks instead of trying to implement kind of advanced mathematical functions out of a paper, right? We now have started to create some automation for folks who are more comfortable operating in that space. I personally kind of love CTFs as a way to learn, and that's how I learned offensive security, and it's how I really familiarized myself with AI security. And so we've started to see a lot of challenges in AI CTFs for folks trying to pivot from their kind of security background into AI. We had one at DEF CON. I think Hyrum hosted some really interesting challenges. There's a company, Dreadnought, that has Crucible, which is a CTF platform that I think all of the DEF CON challenges are in. So if you miss DEF CON and you want to kind of see what kind of challenges folks who have been working in AI security think are...
And Dreadnought you can use at any time, is that right?
Yeah, but it's just an online platform. You can register.
Dreadnought.io.
And so if you are not familiar with what are the challenges that AI red teamers think are interesting, what security controls are they trying to evade, that would be a great place to start because you'll get a very bite-sized challenge and be able to work through it.
Last question, and then have the audience ask some. So in terms of, Hyrum, you mentioned AI vulnerabilities. I guess a question for each of you is, doesn't seem to be a standard kind of place where people report bugs, vulnerabilities. We may not even know it's an AI vulnerability. Certainly, many of us who deal with the science community, there's lots of machine learning models. What should we do in terms of how should we think about, this may or may not be an AI bug or vulnerability in terms of identifying it, reporting it, telling somebody, are there standards that are evolving? Just talk a little bit about it. It's evolving from traditional vulnerability reporting and security. Where is it going? How should we think about it?
So I think, was that a question to me, Anita? Okay, so first, I just want to acknowledge that vulnerability is a loaded term, and there's discussion already in the community that for AI, are they really vulnerabilities, right? So others use the word flaw, some will use weakness. I want to note that actually there's the CWE board, there's an AI working group that's defining, first of all, the CVE board decided that they would not classify most of the cases they've seen as vulnerabilities. This is actually good news. This is good news because it means that, there's a thou shalt not use code with a CVE on a government system may not apply in some cases. This CWE working group has defined a structure in which they can categorize some of these flaws as weaknesses. So instruction following that can be exploited as a weakness for a jailbreak can be classified in a CWE. So this is ongoing work. And I would encourage you to go look at the sort of the public blogs and comments that the CWE board has put out about that. What I think is really great about this is, again, we know we have a process. We just need to plug into this process where it makes sense and enhance it where it doesn't make sense. And that's exactly what's happening right now with a lot of hard work from volunteers across the industry, including some colleagues at NVIDIA and at Robust Intelligence as well. So,
I think Perri hinted to it earlier, but I really like that AI has kind of fallen under the existing norms for how we do vulnerability disclosure. And that's how we handle it at NVIDIA. If you found a vulnerability in a specific software package, you're reporting that the exact same way as if you found some sort of vulnerability in an AI system. And the great thing about kind of larger enterprises is that they have a team who can triage those. And so whether it's a vulnerability or a weakness or an abuse, it doesn't really matter. On the NVIDIA page, they're actually just called concerns. So if you have a concern about the system, you report it just like you would report anything else. You provide some evidence, we triage it and see if there's something there to fix. And I think that kind of falling under existing norms and structures is a much more sustainable path than creating something out of whole cloth.
Perri, I'll ask you with the twist that I know the DARPA AI for Cyber has evolved to include ARPA-H and healthcare, which is so important. Anything to add about vulnerabilities, kind of with the addition of potential healthcare AI vulnerabilities?
Yeah, and I should have mentioned that earlier. I was alluding to it when I talked about our focus on public health, but actually, yeah, the challenge brought in ARPA-H as a partner. DARPA is not the only ARPA in the U.S. government, and one of the newest ARPAs is the Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health. And ARPA-H has significantly invested in software security and cybersecurity. One of their foremost program managers in this space, Andrew Carney, actually came on to take over the challenge after I went up to the director's office. And he has been a fantastic partner in focusing the challenge on some of our core infrastructure needs like healthcare. In that same area, healthcare has its own unique AI challenges in the same way that it has its own unique software security challenges. There's a significant amount of data in healthcare, and there's traditional business applications where AI is going to be applied that then have to be tailored for data that's much more sensitive than perhaps more traditional data. Further, AI is broadly applicable to many different healthcare and biological science challenges and problems. in ways that are tailored to those specific challenges. You might be optimizing the supply chain for organ donations, or designing a reinforcement learning algorithm that can improve how we insert surgical, microscopic surgical devices into our bodies. And in each case, one is going to have to think seriously about the not just vulnerabilities, but the flaws and weaknesses of how AI is applied there. And that discussion, that consideration is going to have to be tailored to, in some cases, the specific application, which requires the intersection of expertise. I'm really glad that Hyrum talked about the different ways that we think about AI weaknesses versus flaws versus vulnerabilities, because that is critical to how we consider these challenges, which is that unfortunately, we don't have the privilege of having a high level, very discrete taxonomy that can be applied across the board. We have to engage with the nuance of the problem space, and we have to have more complex discussions.
Open it up for some audience questions. Maybe think of some. I'm sure folks have. There's so much expertise here, so I'm going to hand it the microphone, and I'll let you be the shepherd here.
Hi, Lori Sussman from the University of Southern Maine. Really amazing discussion, and I really appreciate the panel very, very much. One of the things that I think about as we have students participating in CTFs is two things. I'd love to get the impression from the panel. The first is, how do we reinforce ethical domain when we're, taking these excited young people and we're putting them in CTFs? Is that something that you all are thinking about? And the other piece of that is, do you ever worry about, the fact that we have very few assets where we can, especially at state universities, do anything but open source? So are we training the tools for the hackers when we have the students working these problem sets?
So I absolutely adore Capture the Flag. That was how I got my start when I was in school, actually. And I think the impetus for Capture the Flag is kids are going to want to hack things. There's going to be a subset of computer science students that don't enjoy building software as much as they enjoy breaking it. So rather than set them free on the internet, let's give them a safe, gamified environment in which they can hack. They can hack software. They can hack challenges. And this, so I think CTFs are a fundamentally good thing that does teach novice, nascent hackers responsible behavior, showing them that there is the place and time to demonstrate offensive behavior, and providing them that safe environment to do so. To answer your second question, I obviously am a major proponent of open source software. I thought that was a necessary aspect of producing useful research on the challenge that could be broadly adopted. But that was a very serious consideration that one has to make when considering whether to open source anything. And DARPA obviously has many processes for thinking about this specific question, which is, what are we open sourcing, and what is the broader impact? For something like the AI Cyber Challenge, the quite a bit of thought was put into the design of the challenge, but ultimately we assessed that these tools are going to be significantly more impactful for defense than offense. Offense just needs to find one vulnerability and then drive hard on turning that into a capability. But defense needs to find all of the vulnerabilities in the software, or as many as they can, and then fix that. Things like generative AI are actually very applicable to fixing vulnerabilities, to generating patches, etc., and at looking across the board and identifying many potential flaws. So, and defenders don't need to prove beyond a doubt that this can be used to attack the software. If they find a flaw, they don't even need to know that it's a vulnerability if it's an easy fix to make. And so I think that I think that for any researcher, you ask ethical questions and you go through a process of determining what you are publicly releasing and the impact it has. I will say that I am incredibly excited about the ability of AI to advance defenders' capabilities today.
Just 30 seconds. I would just chime in. Lori, thanks for your question. And I want to echo, it's as the saying goes, it's more fun to be a pirate than to join the Navy. And I really appreciate when there are CTFs that include a defensive element, because defense is hard. And I wish we had more gamification of the defensive side. This is especially true in generative AI. Any kind of like monkey to keyboard can break ChatGPT, but it's really, really hard to have a comprehensive solution. So I'd love to see more gamification of that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the insightful discussion. I'm Phua Cao from Illinois. So much of your talk has been about machine learning in the area of security. I wonder what's your opinion about machine unlearning from the perspective of the defenders and the attacker. For example, for an AI model to be used in defensive, it has to learn so much about the architecture of the system, how it works, and there are personal information in that. And the model need to unlearn certain kind of information. And attacker can also employ machine unlearning as well to some degree. So I wonder, what's your opinion about machine unlearning?
Can I ask one question back? I'd like to know what you mean by an attacker using machine unlearning that usually requires training time access.
For example, the attacker can have their own logic to bypass the defender system. And for example, a malware can employ machine unlearning techniques so that the logic of the malware could not be available for the forensics.
If I understand your question right, I was just having a conversation about unlearning, and I'm not an expert in machine learning, but I talked to an expert last night for dinner. And my understanding and parroting back is that machine learning is still basically an academic concept and is not used commercially because of the scale of the problem. What it requires is you to sort of, there are different techniques, but essentially stomp out a piece of information in a retraining process that is computationally intensive. And so guess what? It's not happening today. There's machine learning, unlearning as a concept and as a technique, but it is not a practice. So as far as what would happen to an attacker, I'd love to discuss that offline and figure out more. It's not clear to me how an attacker would leverage that because of the computational and training requirement considerations. I don't know if anybody else has a thought.
I think building on your first concern about the privacy of specific data and the adaptability of these models, that's something everyone is going to deal with in a security context or not. And that's where we start to see some of the composability and agentic systems be very useful, because ideally you're not training in specific architecture data or PII into the model. Instead, now that the context windows have grown larger, you can pull those in using a request that passes through role-based access control and use in-context learning in the prompt so that you're not having to actually change the underlying model through something like unlearning.
Hi, Jay Gonzaga University. Two questions. One is about the using of AI for red teaming, pen testing. So there's a lot of jailbreaks and people reporting that. And there's also not so much of guardrails being reported. And a lot of guardrails being implemented was more from the big tech giants. So my question is, what are your thoughts about this maybe asymmetric in terms of jailbreaks that then do anything now that's being reported very, very quickly versus the guardrails that's more tech giants doing that alignment themselves? That's question one. The other one is simpler, is Atlas. The MITRE's Atlas that talk about AI vulnerabilities. What are your thoughts about them? Are they going to be like MITRE ATT&CK? Not like that? So a lot of questions there, but thank you.
I think I heard an initial question about using AI systems to do kind of more traditional pen testing and red teaming.
Yeah. So there's a pen test GPT. There's other things being reported. There's someone reported for Illinois thing. I think he reported 47% of the 0-day website. And I saw that paper. But anyways, there's a lot of this work that being discovery using jailbreaks or other techniques to do pen testing, discover vulnerabilities, and executing, exploiting the vulnerabilities automatically. But some of them are successful, some are not. So this is asymmetric. It's asymmetric, right? The jailbreaks, dance, or these things reported a lot. The guardrails are not being reported a lot. So your thoughts on them?
Yeah, I think that there are two elements there. One, on the offensive side of the house, we've seen a nice uplift from some of these capabilities, but not a step level increase. We can maybe get a little faster, a little better at some of the things that are not actually the meat and bones of the job, like writing the reports. We can get better in that way. And some of the models that are being published to do that, I think are maybe not as useful as just using an API naively. On the reported vulnerabilities and guardrails side, I think Hyrum alluded to this earlier. Currently, it's far, far easier to find some sort of jailbreak, or we'll use the term jailbreak. But it's easier to do that than to build a guardrail. And the systems for implementing guardrails are not unified across the industry. So there's not like a YAML format that we can push that everyone can ingest to use the guardrail. And so there's certainly a volume asymmetry between the two in terms of what's reported. But I'm not sure that there's really an impact asymmetry at this point.
We've got time for, sorry. Go ahead, and then we'll do one more question.
I just want to chime in, and if you're not familiar with MITRE Atlas, which is the last question, encourage you to check it out. So it's intended to mimic MITRE ATT&CK. It's different in a few ways. So as we talked about at the beginning, most of MITRE Atlas comes from white hat attacker scenarios and red team scenarios, with many peppered in about real life events. But over time, that will become similar to MITRE ATT&CK, a kill chain that can result in objective using various evasions and other techniques to use AI to come to some cybersecurity outcome. So you can go to atlas.mitre.org to see that, and really grateful for the MITRE team for putting that together.
Hi, my name is Tomomi Imamura. I'm an enterprise cybersecurity architect from University of Wisconsin-Madison. Thank you so much for the panel discussion. I have a question regarding the pipeline from student to a professional workforce. I do echo students are really excited about pen testing, for example, and knowing Gen AI and AI environment, we do need more security workforce. So knowing that we're going to run out of, we need more cybersecurity professionals in the future. And we work in higher education environment, and students are very excited about, for example, pen testing. So how do we connect this pipeline from our environment to the professional? And I think based on my experience, we do have a student club called Cybersecurity Student Club at UW-Madison, and I'm a member of the club, and they're so excited about doing pen testing. But if I go talk to them, they really want to have more hands-on experience, and so that they can get a professional job going forward. But there's no easy way for provide that kind of hands-on experience. So if you have any suggestions, guidance from my experience, that would be great.
First of all, I think many members of my team would be happy to come talk to your club, so we can arrange that. And we've mentioned a couple of different security conferences here, and I think that's something that a lot of students don't engage with early enough. They wait until they're professionals and then they submit talks. But you can submit talks or go to these conferences where there will be events like CTFs, and you'll be able to really get a lot of personal interaction with industry researchers. And I think it will shape, if your students are able to make time during the summer to go to some of these. Often there are scholarships for students or free tickets, and they'll be able to interact with researchers in a way that will probably change the trajectory of their education. They'll find new research interests or discover that the career is much broader, because I do think there are a lot of students who see pen testing and think that's the thing they want to do because they aren't really aware of a lot of other things. And that's the kind of thing, context they'll get at some of these conferences.
Yeah, I think that a lot of these gamified competitions do teach skills that are very real world applicable. And so while students might feel as though this isn't real world expertise, I have had so many employers come to me and say, not, can I get a security researcher that has 5 years of experience doing software security, but can I get one of these kids that understands how to write a memory corruption exploit? Can I get one of these kids that comes out of college and actually knows how to use Metasploit, or even understands why asymmetric cryptography like RSA is more vulnerable to quantum attacks because they can actually implement RSA themselves, and they've implemented some of the attacks against it. So I wouldn't discount these competitions. In fact, I would encourage, especially the ones that are more technically difficult, because they provide a set of skills that make students stand out from the rest of the applicants. In addition to that, I would say that so many companies are creating more and more internships where students have the ability to explore many different aspects of cybersecurity. And oftentimes those internships can be found in places that don't seem like traditional cybersecurity companies, because more and more companies are investing in security. And then students walk away with knowledge of a specific sector and with an understanding of how to adapt cybersecurity problems for that sector. So I would encourage, I would certainly encourage these competitions, even if they don't feel necessarily real world, but I would also encourage students to widen their aperture of what companies they think are cybersecurity companies, because every company these days is a cybersecurity company.
Well, I think it's time to wrap it up. Thanks to the panelists. I know they'll be here for a little bit. I know Hyrum's got to head out of here, but I think the panelists will be around for a little bit if you want to ask more questions. And big round of applause. Thank you all so much for your insights.